Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon. It's another topical episode coming at you. This week we're talking about yet another assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Can you believe it? We'll find out if they're actually eating the dogs or not. And we're talking about Hugh Edwards, the horrible Hugh Edwards scandal, and the fact he's not going to prison. And also the Kier Starman clothes scandal. Not quite the same level of drama as American politics, but did Kier Starman get some clothes bought for him? And we're doing all that with our old friend, one of the great comedians in the nation, and presenter on GB News is, of course, Mr. Simon Evans. How are you doing, Simon?
Very well, thanks, Nick. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, no worries. It's officially the topical podcast now, so as long as you don't mind blasting through these topics, we're going to do... I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about, and then luckily, the world provided plenty of stuff with another assassination attempt on Trump, and it's this guy, Ralph, perhaps, who bust into the Mar-a-Lago golf course, busting through the bushes with an AK-47, but then he didn't get taken out, did he? But he got sufficiently detained, and now he's been charged, actually, with possession of a firearm by a prohibited person, a convicted felon, and possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number. So all he managed to obliterate was the serial number, luckily, in this case. What was your initial take on this one? CIA, random nutter, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, the first thing was that it was a good deal less dramatic, wasn't it? So when the news broke, you weren't sure quite how seriously to take it. Obviously, was there an extent of Trump trying to revive his assassination narrative, world's most hunted man, to get that, having obliterated the debate handily with the eating the dogs meme, whether it was like all part of his process. But it sounds like it was pretty serious, in fact, as well. Yeah, sounds like the guy got himself into a reasonably sort of secure and advantageous position. And he had I am so far away from being any kind of weapons expert. When you hear AK-47, you kind of assume these are the sort of things that people unleash in Afghan wedding parties, aren't they? Or trying to shoot drones down. They're not considered to be a long-wave sniping weapon. But I mean, God, you just become desensitized to it. It is pretty serious. That's another attempt on the man's life. And although he made away and got away in a Nissan and all kinds of other slightly sort of humiliating details, the photographs of him looking a bit craggy and wild-eyed at various pro-Ukrainian rallies, and his social media seems to be largely focused on Ukraine rather than Donald Trump being Hitler reborn. But God, only a matter of time, before one of these gets through at the moment, and we are still treating it, as I say, as if it is all just of a piece with Haiti, pet-eating migrants and transing women in transing migrants in jail.
Yeah, I know.
It's not.
It is mad. I mean, the last one had the lurid live video aspect at a rally. It had that movie kind of quality. It also had that Baudrillard hyper-real quality we've talked about.
Yes.
Reference to 9/11. Yeah. You're like, could this be real? Because it's so... And I'm certainly not doing Alastair Campbell and saying it wasn't real. It certainly was. But it had that shocking quality. This one, just because you didn't see it, didn't have that quality and it wasn't as close. But it is still incredibly disturbing. And when you look at it, Trump's had loads of these. I mean, the 2016 Las Vegas rally, a guy tried to snatch the guy's gun out of his hand. It was a Secret Service, a police officer's pistol. It was a British guy trying to grab it, and an officer quickly subdued him. But that one was pretty edgy. There's been 2 ricin poisoning attempts, and one of those, I think, was a bit more... Because I thought there was 4 assassination attempts, but I was counting Las Vegas, the 2020 ricin, and the last 2. But actually, there's the 2018 ricin, there's the 2017 forklift attack. That was a guy in a forklift truck who later said he was actually trying to assassinate Trump, but no one actually even thought he was. So it was wasn't considered that serious. He was trying to flip the presidential limousine, but that one was considered it was so ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah.
But
these things are ridiculous until they work, aren't they? I can't remember why. I was probably following up some truther claim or something about steel beams. But I was reading about the previous attempt on the World Trade Center. I think it was in about 1998 or something. I can't remember for sure. When there was a van, full of explosives, was going to be driven into one of the major car parks and detonated underneath World Trade Center 1 in such a way that it would tilt and collapse onto the other one as well. Right. And that was, it was intervened. I can't remember how far they got with it, but it was prevented in much the same way that Guy Fawkes was prevented from blowing up Parliament, and it all felt immediately afterwards as if it had been like, imagine what would have been like if that had happened,
Yeah.
And then a few years later, it does happen, and it changes the course of the century.
Yeah,
So
Don DeLillo predicted that in
yeah.
1985 in his book White Noise. He said that he had planes will fly into the Twin Towers. So I guess there was always
Yes,
hints of it.
and then Alex Jones, of course, as well.
Yeah, but yeah, he nailed it, and even
Yeah.
said that they blamed Bin Laden. I mean, he absolutely nailed it. Alex Jones was right. But speaking of Alex Jones, I mean, yeah, we can talk about a few things. One is what would happen if they had got Trump and how horrifically chaotic that would be, and two is whether this guy is a. So I'm now of the opinion that it's not that he's necessarily an activated asset. The guy seems like a nutter. He had a gun charge in 2003 from having a machine gun. He was in a 3-hour standoff with police. As you say, he's obsessed with Ukraine, almost as obsessed as Leo Kurz with Ukraine. He's dyeing his hair the Ukraine colors. He's sending Afghan soldiers into Ukraine or trying to. This guy's obsessed.
Yeah.
And so the guy's a nutter, but at the same time, of course, that's the kind of person they would use if they were going to use someone, And then you.
Well, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think. I certainly don't think they were using him, and I don't, for what it's worth, think that they were using whatever his name was on the other one that nicked his ear. Yeah, because I mean, it's just too crazy, and I do tend to think, however tempting it is in the madness we all live in, and the sort of hyper reality, as you say, and the simulacra and all the rest of it. I do tend to think that still that old thing about conspiracies do tend to come out. If I'm not saying they don't exist, but soon, the stitching comes apart fairly quickly if there is one. I think it was more a question of incompetence, but a bafflingly high degree of incompetence shown by Trump's close security. On this occasion at Mar-a-Lago, they seem to have been a lot more proactive and have taken action immediately and have sort of dealt with it fairly competently. But
they saw the gun sticking out the fence, basically.
Yeah, the trouble with these things happens is, I think, because we all experience the news as an entertainment product, and then we also all watch TV shows. This was one that, for instance, just occurred to me last night because my friend, I haven't seen him for years, but my friend Will Smith, the writer, used to be in The Thick of It and also write for The Thick of It and Veep and stuff. He got an Emmy for Slow Horses, which is a kind of downbeat Le Carré-esque kind of a spy troupe based in Slough, third sort of outside of the sacred circle of the spy rings.
Gary Oldman.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I've worked with the other Will Smith. When I first got offered to work with Will Smith, I thought it might be that Will Smith. You mean? But mine was the Will Smith of the slap, the pre-slap. But yours is the writer Will Smith.
Yeah,
which actually would have been better for my career. But go on.
He might. Well, this is it. You've got to scale your context, haven't you? He's a very funny guy, and I don't know exactly what he did. He obviously best adapted existing novels. But in the very first one I saw, I couldn't watch it because the plot was that some white British nationalists and white sort of NF nationalists had kidnapped a Pakistani student and were holding him hostage in some basement somewhere. Until the government agreed to their demands, which I think was something to do with, re-emigration or something, or deportations. And it was just such an obvious dog bites, man bites dog kind of scenario, a reversal of all the things that the British security services are constantly fighting against, which is to say the enormous threat that is presented to us by people who hate Britain, rather than the other way around. But this is the way we think about everything now. We're always constantly looking, I think, for the interesting plot twist, So rather than just some nutter trying to shoot a man who's running for president, which is probably, in all honesty, 9 times out of 10 what it's going to be, you think, but was he actually recruited by the Republicans because they know if they can kill Trump, not only will they be more likely Vance will be elected and there'll be a huge surge of support, but also they've got rid of Trump, who is their biggest problem at the moment. Something like that. Do you know what I mean? Some kind of clever thing that would actually drive a novel rather than just it's a nutter, which it's going to be.
That super Tansky nutcase lefty put, I wonder how many more assassination attempts, inverted commas, Trump can squeeze in before the election. So the lefties just go straight for that. They're completely nuts. And but my sort of theory on this is it almost doesn't matter at this point. whether it's deep state or random nutter, because the climate created, of course, by the Dems is so hostile and violent anyway that it's almost the same thing. They are creating that atmosphere, knowing someone will do something like this. I mean, Trump had I think he released this. I think he released this on Truth Social. He had a whole list of things that they'd said in the past, and they're so bad. I won't go through all of them. There's far too many. But it's like Kamala Harris: Trump is a threat to our democracy and fundamental freedoms. Biden, it's time to put Trump in a bullseye. There's one existential threat. It's Donald Trump. Trump is a genuine threat to this nation. And it goes on and on. There's, Pelosi saying the same thing. And he's got a whole list of them. And when you look through them, you go, yeah, they're saying all the things you would say if you wanted to get someone shot. I mean, and then, of course, they always say, I hope he's okay. And I'm worried about him and blah, blah. And you always think, but you said he was Hitler 2 seconds ago. So aren't they
the right way to get rid of Hitler is at the ballot box? Obviously, we all know that. Go back in time and really campaign much harder in 1933 this time.
Yeah. Didn't Hitler have something like 40-something assassination attempts? I mean, this is what they're going for, isn't it? They're trying to...
God knows.
Tough guy.
Castro had quite a few, didn't he? And none of them landed.
It was pretty
and
wily.
They got JFK instead.
You could not get him. But I mean, do you see my point? Am I just the opposite of Trump deranged?
A few years ago, I can't remember when the phrase started to get used, but stochastic terrorism was a phrase that was used to accuse the right of doing this, creating a space and a mindset and an opportunity to take action. And of course, they've sort of accused Trump and Vance of doing that in regard to bomb threats in Springfield now. They're saying that these are at your door. I don't know how credible any of those threats are, but they have disrupted schools and so on. So, I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it? We've watched and we've discussed several of high-profile commentators online who try to say, let's please not slip into the extremes of lunacy that we've been, the purity spirals or, the woke right, which is a ridiculous phrase and doesn't work at all. But I kind of understand what they're getting at, which is to say you just see everything through that lens. I think you have to be able to use strong language when you're campaigning. I defended Boris Johnson and his team when they were using like vaguely Churchillian language to defy Europe over, trying to get the Brexit negotiations through, and other people going, oh my God, they're using the language of war, surrender and things like this. This is disgraceful, And I'm like, come on, we all know that political campaigning is used in people reach for a vocabulary that has some blood and guts behind it. That's fairly typical. So I wouldn't necessarily say I don't think Trump is a threat to democracy, and I think it's kind of disingenuous that they would say that as if people haven't already seen what a 4-year Trump term looks like. The one exception, obviously, being the supposed insurrection, and Trump certainly fell into a ridiculous trap there, which he does tend to do. I think it was a trap. I think it was a very well successfully baited and snapped trap, and it's been used to delegitimize him. He would be in a much stronger position if he'd been firm, on that. I know they use the hoax language anyway, like they do with the very fine people hoax and so on. But the truth is, he could have been more. He could have distanced himself certainly from the 6th of January more firmly than he did at the time, and he made an error there. But in every other regard, the actual 4 years in office. No new wars, diplomacy probably at least as good as the previous 4 years, I would argue better. No escalation of serious conflict, put in place the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was long overdue. And, some of his rhetoric with regard to North Korea, whatever, might have been alarming, but it did no damage. The idea that the second term is going to be catastrophic, like an epochal hinge point in the history of the world, is just kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's proven to be ridiculous. I mean, but what about... Yeah, we can talk about the exact language they use in the campaigning. I understand all that. But clearly the atmosphere, the insanely hostile atmosphere created by the media and the Democrats over a number of years has created this extreme animosity towards Trump. And the fact is that it only goes one way. I mean, the fact is there don't seem to be assassination attempts on anyone else. And did you see Elon Musk's joke about this, which I must say I didn't quite understand, but he put out this tweet. This guy, Doge Designer, said, why they want to kill Donald Trump. And Musk replied, and no one is even trying to assassinate Biden, Kamala. I think it had a emoji on it. And you go,
Yeah,
what was it? And he said it was a joke that hadn't gone down, that went down well in person, but not online. And he does have Asperger's.
right.
But was that a satire on the fact that no one tries to kill them because they're not in power, because Biden's just not around? It doesn't even matter. Was it about how it only goes one way, or was it just that they're awful people? I actually don't even know the joke. I've seen someone on Twitter accusing us on GB of pretending not to know the joke. I literally didn't know it. Me, Andrew, and Josh couldn't figure it out. And you understand Josh,
I
but
did
like
see
even
that
Andrew
one,
couldn't.
and 9 times out of 10, I do get Musk's jokes. I thought his one about Taylor Swift, "I'll give you a baby" or "I'll give you a child," was a bit close to the wind.
He also he said Ogada cats as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, he is joking clearly, but that does have unfortunate resonances. Certainly, I think the idea of assassinating Kamala is interesting in the way and in the degree to which that is unthinkable. I just cannot imagine anyone, even a lunatic, psychotic glory hunter, who just wants his middle name to be inserted into the history books. She's just sort of, I don't know, undifferentiated almost. I mean, an assassination has to be like on the chessboard. It has to be toppling the king, doesn't it? Literally the king with Martin Luther. I always had that slightly unfortunate resonance of foreshadowing, I thought. And at the very least, Bobby Kennedy is a presidential candidate, and obviously has it's like a kind of you're like burning through a line there. They're not taken out at random, these people, generally speaking, assuming, I mean, I am perfectly open to the idea that the CIA were involved in any and all of these, it could be proven, but it would be remarkable if they've kept it quiet all this time successfully.
Well, I believe
they failed to keep.
I tend to believe they were in JFK, but only because, I mean, Bobby Kennedy believes it, although he does believe a lot of weird stuff about water and homeopathic medicines or whatever he believes. So I don't know, but I do tend to think JFK is definitely dodgy. But I think all of those ones are dodgy. The Bobby Kennedy era, Martin Luther King, that whole era was dodgy. But I don't know. The Harris thing's interesting, isn't it? Because, as you say,
I tell you what, I've never got past with RFK. I will just say this.
Okay.
I would be quite prepared to believe it was Oswald acting alone. Even I will understand the bizarre behavior of the body and the impacts and the reaction and the kinetics of it. All of that could be explained. But I just don't understand how then Jack Ruby assassinates Oswald and then himself is interviewed by a known CIA operative, Jolyon his name is, who has previously killed an elephant with an overdose of LSD, visits Jack Ruby in his jail cell, and Jack Ruby is never again capable of coherent speech. That's the bit where I go, well, hang on. If you wanted to prove that Oswald acted alone and to make, to draw a red line or whatever kind of line underneath this and like reassure the American people that that's as far as it goes, you could hardly have put into place a second order sequence of events more dubious than that. And that was all on camera. Incredible, the assassination of Oswald himself. That to me is more disturbing than the assassination of the president.
Right. Yeah,
because they're actually willing to do that to kill the killer. And that to me is just I don't know. I don't think I will get past that personally. There may be an explanation for it, but I've never seen a decent one.
Yeah, it's a long time since I read up on it.
That was funny enough brought to attention by Marta Maid, the
Daryl Cooper.
Daryl Cooper, yeah, that was a couple of years ago. I think he did a piece on that
recently.
Yeah.
It's been so long since I read up on JFK. I don't remember all the details, but that's even more shocking than I remember. My point was just going to be that it implies that Trump is a serious threat, that he's going to get power. They're not bothering to assassinate other people. It's Trump because they think he's going to get in, and he's the one that can actually affect change. No one bothers with Biden and Harris because no one thinks they're really doing anything. I think that's an argument for that, isn't there?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good
They obviously
point.
think Trump's
Yes.
going to win.
Why kill a puppet? Why kill an avatar
That
for
would be a
the
great
deep state? Yeah.
that would be a great angle for Trump to take. He knew I was gonna win. Do you know what I mean? It's like, why else would he do it? Like, obviously, it's like you say Harris is ahead in the polls, but 2 assassination attempts say that actually they think it's gonna be me. Or why would they bother? But that's one angle anyway. All right. I mean, the guy, by the way, he said he backed Trump in 2016, but there was no record of him voting at all in 2016. He has been very pro Harris in his tweets. He's also been pro Vivek and also pro Nikki Haley. So he has a slightly eclectic set of beliefs, but it's not really surprising given he's a bit nuts. He published a book himself with and a picture which seems to be what's standing in as a cover. Is just a bizarre sort of cover, and there's writing on it that's typed out, but that you can't actually read because of the background. And this is where you just realize you're
Right.
dealing with a nutter because you can't read the
Yeah.
print on his own, this piece of paper he's using as a book cover. And in the book, he says that
Yeah.
Iran can kill Trump if they want, like they have his blessing. And yeah, the guy is, I mean, is a bit kooky.
That is odd to back. I know it's a fairly minor point, but to back both Vivek and Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley is a war hawk on like Hillary Clinton level, and certainly would have been pro Ukraine and pro escalating that as far as you like. I don't think Vivek was he? I think
No.
Vivek was
He's the
actually he was a like de-escalation.
Do you know what,
I
Simon?
mean, he personally for me was pretty cool,
I'm
but
starting to think this guy's a bit of a jerk. Do you remember that? Do you know that whole Norm Macdonald joke? It's like this guy might not be all there. Do you know what I mean?
he may not have a whole coherent philosophy at all.
I'm starting to doubt his Weltanschauung. Yeah, it's like the guy's a nutter.
Even the friend-enemy distinction is looking shaky.
Yeah, you were like, I'm all right with him showing her a golf course in a pink T-shirt trying to kill a former president, but I'm not sure about this Haley thing.
The Vivek Haley axis.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up. What about the dogs thing? Because the dogs thing keeps coming up because one attempt by mainstream media was to say, well, Trump's had this rhetoric about Haitians, so this is inevitable. It was almost like saying, of course he's going to be shot because he's saying naughty things about Haitians. So that keeps coming back. The eating the dogs. And there was an additional one, which was the geese. Trump said, migrants are walking off with the town's geese, which I thought was such an incredible phrase, the town's geese. And he followed it up with, they're taking the geese, which was just so, the way he said it was so insane and perfect. And it was so funny. But it's just like, I love it if he just pledged communal geese in all towns. I will replace the geese taken by the migrants. That would be so good. They're taking the geese.
Will gather.
The town's geese.
As if it's a single word, like from medieval Hamlet or something.
The town's geese. Yeah. We have consulted the town's geese, my lord. Yeah, that's hilarious. It was so perfect. But then they claimed in the Times that Vance had made the whole thing up. So we did this piece in the Times. So we did it on GB, but it's here. It's my cat-eating claim was all bull. And the idea is that he created the story. And what Vance actually said was, I say that we're creating a story, mean we're creating the American media focusing on it. So he's saying we created the actual focus that allowed the media to talk about it. So he's it's a little bit of a tricky one for him because basically they haven't got, hard evidence. They've got loads of calls and anecdotal evidence of people saying they're eating the cat, the 9/11 calls. And Christopher Rufo found that in Dayton, African migrants were eating cats. Dayton's a neighboring town, but they're not Haitians. I mean, we're going to get this cat evidence at some point, I feel. But for now, the media's running with it's completely false. I claim it's directionally true. So it doesn't even matter. Trump's great at creating an image. Big, beautiful wall that the Mexicans are going to pay for. Now they're eating the dog. And it's like, all anyone's going to remember is they're eating the dogs. And it speaks to the uncontrolled immigration from incompatible cultures. So does it even matter if it's strictly true?
I think that's exactly right. And that is basically what J.D. Vance said, wasn't it, on a series of media interviews yesterday, ABC and CNN. I think it was ABC most famously, wasn't it? And he really said to that woman, we created this story. And she went, what? You created it? You mean you made it up? And he's like, no, we framed it. We put together the blocks, that pre-existed and made it possible for you to cover it. But until then, nobody had addressed the fact. For me, personally, once you learn it, the idea that 20,000 migrants from the single poorest and most dysfunctional state in the Western Hemisphere, and a tiny one at that, 20,000 migrants have been brought in to a single small town of 60,000 inhabitants. that really renders any talk about cats and dogs and geese completely superfluous. I mean, that is clearly an absolutely massive deal, and if that is mirrored or echoed or replicated around the rest of the country at all, then that is going to resonate for Trump's base. That is a massive, massive deal. And the road traffic accidents were far worse, because there's a suggestion, well, not a suggestion, I think a report, a very plausible report that they are sidestepping, the normal processes by which you get the right to drive school vehicles and trucks and so on.
Yeah, well, there's a
So
you're gone.
well, it's basically what you're saying is right. By using a kind of vivid cartoonish image that is borderline absurd about barbecuing people's pets, he has actually created an extraordinarily vivid insight into a small town that's got serious issues, and has also obliterated everything else that was discussed during the debate, which probably most people say, on balance, Kamala, probably won, certainly against the expectations created by the first debate.
Yeah, even Scott Adams reassessed his initial prognosis of the debate. He said, "Oh, I gave it as Kamala because it was a tie, therefore a win for her." But he's going now. All anyone's remembering is the dogs. I'm surprised he didn't realize that early on. That was all anyone was going to
Yeah,
remember. But now that's been
yeah.
usurped by the assassination attempt. We should just be talking about dogs being eaten, but we're talking about this plumbing assassination attempt. So, yeah, so it moves on very rapidly again. And what did you make of? Speaking of the Haitian migrants who can't drive, there was this guy with an invalid driving license, and he plows into a school bus and kills an 11-year-old kid and more than 20 students injured. And then the father said, "I wish that my son was killed by a 60-year-old white man because it wouldn't be politicized essentially by Trump and Vance." And what did you make of that?
And it's not a brand new thing. It's happened before. It's happened with fathers of daughters that have been raped and murdered in Europe as well by refugees and migrants, and they are, I'm sure, like genuinely and anxious that their daughter's death should not be used to further a narrative that they personally don't approve of. But I'm afraid it's not entirely for them to decide.
Yeah, that's the thing. The guy had
Other people have children as well, and they want to know that they can go to school safely.
Exactly. Horrible grief for the father. And so you sort of give him a pass on a personal level, perhaps, or some wouldn't. But you can't, give him a total free pass because this guy is dangerous. And the danger is very much tied to the fact that he doesn't know the rules of the road of the country he's in and doesn't have a valid drive license.
Yeah.
So it's not irrelevant that he's a migrant. It's highly relevant.
Exactly, and it's not. It's not even. I mean, it's morally neutral in a way. His failure to drive, the blame, very much as with Rotherham, the blame lands with the authorities who are so anxious to engineer the society that they think we all deserve, or whatever, that they cut corners.
Yeah.
So I don't feel even that it's like it would instill a hatred of Haitian immigrants for me. It would instill a hatred of a system that was allowing them to present a danger.
Yeah.
That seems to be the obvious, but I don't know whether that's just like whether that's wishful thinking on my part. Whether clearly, if word gets around that that's happening, then you are a couple of inches closer to coming back to lynching or whatever. So maybe he has a point, but I mean, I find it disturbing, like I think most fathers would, to see anyone speaking about their daughter's death in those terms. He could have just said, "I wish my son had, I don't know, died in neutral way or something, had just, it's terrible that he's lost his life, and it's even worse that he's lost his life in such a way that is going to be politicized." He didn't have to say being killed by a 60-year-old white man, which is basically me.
Yeah.
I don't want to be fingered for this imaginary crime.
Yeah.
I've never come close to doing that.
Yes, exactly. I've never plowed into a school bus because I'm not an idiot. Yeah, horrible story. Speaking of horrible stories, we just had Hugh Edwards coming back to Old England. We had Hugh Edwards not going to prison, and he had 41 sexual images of children on his phone. One of them was between 7 and 9 years old, which is just horrendous. And he didn't go to jail. And some people are calling this two-tier justice. I saw a long and pedantic thread from a barrister online saying it was not two-tier justice because anyone would get a similar sentence as a first offender in this case. There are mitigating factors. They don't think he's going to reoffend. there's this questionable mitigating factor of his mental health, which is questionable to me, I'm saying, but they factored all that in, thus he doesn't get prison. The problem with that is the two-tier claim is not that someone else facing the same case would get a different outcome. It's the wider two-tier claim of we're in a society where if you tweet about the riots following the murder of 3 children, you can go to jail for 38 months. If you have 41 sexual images of children, you don't go to jail. Therefore, we look at the morality and the priorities of the regime and we say this is two-tier, even if those aren't like for like. You say one of them is a political phenomenon and one of them has no political, less of a political angle, or you could say it does have a political angle, but one of them is less political, so the guy doesn't go to jail. That's the two-tier aspect. To make a like-for-like comparison, you could compare people like Nick Lowles, who got away with misinformation online, versus those that didn't, and that did also happen. But I've seen people try to debunk that this is two-tier by using a straw man that we mean that someone else would go to jail for the same crime. It's not what we mean. We mean we have a country where you go to jail for memes or posts, but not for being a pedo, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I saw your tweet to that effect. I read the Secret Barrister. I read his long thread. And to be fair, I also read a couple of passages from his own book or her own book that they posted. And to be fair to them, although I do find her tone slightly sort of complacent, patronising, long-suffering, etc., he did express the same degree of horror and revulsion, not only at Hugh Edwards' crimes, but at the police and sentencing and custodial system that tends to say, well, as long as you plead guilty and you do this and you do that, that mitigates it and that mitigates it a bit more and that knocks off 3 months. And so at the end of the day, you're left with a suspended sentence. He was as horrified by that as a system, and he did, as you say, just say, well, but this isn't two-tier because he's a BBC presenter. This is what happens. I do totally agree with you that the sense in my gut that if the woman who posted, "Oh, burn the hell, burn the hotels," and if they die, they die, and if that makes me a racist, so be it. Or I think something like that. She said, right?
Was it the mosque? She said. And there's another guy that said there was another guy called Tyler Kay who reposted. There's the other one who he reposted this wife of the Conservative councillor, Lucy Conley, and she had said, "I don't care if you burn the hotel." So there's various ones like that.
Yeah, the one, but I'm thinking particularly. I mean, the wife of the councillor, I think that was dodgy because she is like politics adjacent. The woman who was like in her 50s, a carer, which is exhausting business. Oh my God, it's such an unthankless task as it is. What a horrible life she has. She's in God knows what degree of mental distress and despair herself, easily stands comparison with whatever Hugh Edwards was going through because he's got hardening arteries, and the idea that she represents a threat to society in a way that he doesn't, I just think doesn't stand up. That's just palpable nonsense. And if you're sending a message through the sentencing to say this sort of thing will not be tolerated, then surely it is much more important to do that by incarcerating Hugh Edwards and making his life, really taking the unpleasant but necessary, definitive, determined action to be completely unambiguous about how society regards this kind of thing. Because he's an extraordinarily high-profile offender. Yes, his reputation is in tatters. He won't work again, but he's had his career. It was a good long career, and I do have some sympathy to a degree for the fact that he has sort of probably gone into this by stages and found, some dark desires that he had being tempted and lured out of him, which in a different course of events and maybe in a different time and place in history, he might never have even been aware he had. It's a horrible bloody world out there if you if you have the wrong desires to begin with and they start to get preyed upon. I don't know the sequence of events that these unpleasant WhatsApp messages that he exchanged are obviously only part of the story. There's always a sense, isn't there, with these people, as others have said, that a lot of them skitter off into the darkness as soon as there's any sort of sense of, you can just delete your messages and there you are in the shadows. But if you wanted to send a message to say, do not even think of taking even one step in this direction, that would have been an opportunity to do so, I think. Whereas this poor woman who was, looking after, I think, a mother, bedbound mother or father, and has now got years in jail. How is she possibly more of a threat to society than Hugh Edwards was on any level? So that is just, you're right. It's completely despicable. And all I would say is it probably wasn't the judge's fault. It wasn't even the prosecutor's fault. It's a fault in the system. But we need to change the culture of what we prosecute and what we punish.
Well, two things spring to mind there for me. One is Starmer's desperately containing the threat of if white working class people develop a group consciousness and all the things that have happened to them, it could really kick off. So he's terrified of that. But the other more disturbing aspect, and you can almost understand that he's terrified of that, and he perhaps should be. But the other more disturbing aspect is we're talking about the Schmittian friend-enemy distinction. If you're saying, well, these are the enemies of our regime, so we punish them very harshly, is Hugh Edwards then a friend of the regime? It does sort of start to look like that by default.
Well, what he is, and you probably know that phrase about, it's from some novel, isn't it? I think that is it Kafka or someone or Dostoevsky, that if you're a common crook, you're just a common crook. But if you're a political, if you're an activist, if you're putting political graffiti on, then you're a threat to the state. It's not like you're a friend of the state. He's just a common crook. They just see him as a bent nail. This bent nail will not be further used in building anything constructive in society. But there's no need to, destroy it just out of spite. I mean, I kind of understand it. It would be good if there were. I suppose if he had limitless resources, I might say it would be good if he could experience a degree of punishment that was, like deterrent, essentially, and then also the rehabilitation program, which is probably best done, while he's under house arrest in his own home and, attending a series of meetings. And I don't know, God knows what you would do to somebody in that situation. He may or may not be somebody who, actively sort it out. I don't want to pretend to any more higher degree of, insight, psychological insight or understanding than I have. I think I think it is plausible that some of these people. You remember when Pete Townsend made Images and Chris Langham? There have been various celebrities over the years. I think there is probably like a part of them that is tantalized by the sheer transgression of it and is intrigued to know. It feels like the Oscar Wilde phrase, feasting with panthers, that kind of sense that they are in some kind of dangerous demimonde where they are experiencing forbidden pleasures. If you were to make those pleasures unforbidden, would they even find them interesting? Very possibly not. I'm not suggesting that as a solution. But you know what I mean? This is why you've got to create an extraordinarily powerful deterrent in the same way that you do in, shepherd flock pastoralist societies. You make the crime of stealing sheep is death. You're not hanged. What's the famous phrase? A man is not hanged for stealing sheep. He is hanged that sheep may not be stolen.
There you go. I mean, you taking the words out of my mouth. Well, not those exact words. I wasn't going to say. That would have been a hell of a coincidence. But I was going to say death penalty for almost everything. Then it's all sorted. But Townsend, I do believe. Oh, I don't know if I believe it, but there was some plausibility in the fact he was claiming he was just doing research, and he feels himself so above the fray. I used to know someone that knew him, and he said, "Yeah, well, he used to claim he'd invented the internet practically, like he perhaps just thought himself so above the fray that this sort of thing didn't bother."
Well, also, he had been abused, I think, hadn't he? He said he had. And Tommy also contains a lot of suggestion that he had a dodgy uncle,
All right. Well, we were on to quite a dark subject there, and then Simon had to go and get a drink of raw milk, is it? You're drinking these days? Raw milk.
To wash the taste of paedophilia out my mouth,
Washing the taste of that out with
degeneracy.
With raw protein and sun on my balls. There's that whole subgroup, isn't there? I can't do it because I can't go in the sun, and I can't drink milk, so I'll just have to remain a total cuck. But maybe we should get on to a slightly lighter story then. Though it's it's still a scandal, but on a far lesser degree. It's Kier Starman has been bought some clothes and glasses, basically, but it is pretty bad. I mean, his wife had £5,000 of clothes paid for by a donor. And he didn't. And then there was this from this guy Lord Ali, and he also gave Starmer £18,685 of work clothes and several pairs of glasses and £20,000
from Dickies.
Yeah, 20 good glasses, £20,000 on accommodation for Starmer, and a similar sum on private office costs. The way it says private office in inverted commas, you naturally think that's dodgy, but it possibly isn't. It's just private. I don't know what private office costs are, but although the donations were declared, Starmer did not disclose them to his wife, Victoria, until last Tuesday, and that's a potential when it could be viewed as a potential conflict. Apparently, that's the problem. How is that the problem? I don't really understand that aspect of it. I understand the
No.
donations seem a bit rich, given that these people are rich, So I do get that part, and the hypocrisy of Starmer going on about these kind of things, criticizing them in the Tories all the time. There's definitely that aspect.
Yeah. Starmer was such a hectoring old, scold when Johnson put his wallpaper up, and I thought the wallpaper was absurdly excessive and also in extraordinarily bad taste. I mean, it just seemed. I can't remember if you remember the private room that Johnson
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Carey decorated with the matching upholstery and wallpaper. But Starmer treated that as if it was a desecration, like fouling the carpet in front of the Queen or something, and then this has happened like within hours of him coming. I mean, it's just the wheels haven't even made it once around the track, have they? It's all coming off.
Yeah.
He's had such a bad start. I mean, the riots. I don't know some people might feel he handled that okay. I think generally the polling on that wasn't too bad, and I think the timing wasn't his fault and the heat of the summer possibly, but the. Some of the measures, which would certainly just go under the banner of austerity if they were being done by the Tories. And there was somebody I was on the news quiz with last week on Radio 4 who described it as sad, that he cancelled the pensioners' fuel allowance. And I didn't say anything at the time, because I didn't want to sort of actually have an out-and-out row. But it's not sad. It's like it's a chosen course of action. Sad is when Mufasa and Darth Vader die on the same day. That wasn't sad. We spent 14 years being told that austerity was a choice and a poor choice at that. And within months, he's come in and done that, and then absolutely could not have presented a more jarring and vivid, adjacency, a juxtaposition of his own privilege. Anyone earning 200 grand a year as household income should be able to dress smartly enough to attend any kind of. You don't need that many suits. 3 decent suits should last you a couple of years each, even if you're prime minister. It's not. You don't have to have like a Hollywood wardrobe. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and
so yeah, he deserves all of the scorn he gets for that, as far as I'm concerned.
The midwits are just going full hypocrite. I mean, old Otto English here. How dare I mean, I've had one nice exchange with him, so I don't have a pop here, Otto, but this is a bad one. How dare people question Boris and Carey's right to spend 53 grand on a wealth donors of other wealth donors' money on designer wallpaper, and fancy designer fittings? Do you expect them to live in a John Lewis nightmare? Do you? So he's mocking Boris for the wallpaper in December 21. Yeah. Then he says here, if we're going to expect the spouses of our PMs to appear on the national and international stages, then perhaps there should be a pot of money put aside to fund their clothes when they do so. Otherwise, someone else ends up paying for it. It's like, I know it's a slightly different tone there. I mean, this is just straightforward.
It's total rank hypocrisy. Yeah. There's no two ways about it. As a stand-up comic, and you'll know this, as a stand-up comic, you can't even claim tax off for suits that you have to buy in order to look a certain way on stage. I have, half a dozen suits, a couple of dinner suits, and just regular suits that 90% of my wear is on stage, but they're not particularly unusual, in that regard. So I can't claim them because they could be worn in any other setting. If I'm not allowed to claim tax off for a business expense for having a suit, then I don't really think that the Prime Minister's wife should be getting some kind of special exemption on it.
No.
That's my view. I think it would be quite good if you allowed them to claim tax off, or to have a completely transparent expenses account. Sure, why not? Give them an extra 20 grand a year. As some people have said, I think it was Gordon Brown that cut down the salary. By comparison with Tony Blair, in terms of actual spending power, what Starmer gets now is quite a lot less, maybe half as much as Tony Blair was getting 20 years ago. If you want to actually escalate the salary of a prime minister so that they can afford to really focus on getting that job and holding to it, and so on, I think that's all up for discussion. But it's not necessary to take what amount to. I don't care if it isn't, technically bribes. There is no way to avoid the suspicion of it in that case, and it's happened so quickly that it's just extraordinary.
Yeah, Dan Hodges wrote, when Kier Starman was doing his honest integrity, newer, cleaner politics stick, some of us said it would come back to bite him, but I didn't think it would happen this quickly. I just don't understand how he didn't recognise this donor stuff would blow up in his face. And I said, could be his assumption that everything he does is inherently good, the knowledge that all major institutions are on his side, the absurdly easy ride the media has given him, his rank stupidity, his psychopathic tendencies, just a few suggestions to get us started. I mean, because he does tend to sort of, I'm right, if things I do are good and right, and things other people do are bad. That's how I sort of see him. Unless you think he has tried to play it by the book on this one, but it all seems either it's
No.
teething problems and getting the hard stuff done first. This isn't. This is just obviously scandal, but he, or is it just collapsing already? I mean, Cummings just quickly had a very interesting tweet on this. Old DC Dominic Cummings had a good point, if I can find it. A tweet today basically saying it was all coming apart already for Starmer, and it has been incredibly inept. Here we go. Starmer's handling of his specs and dresses bills plus Sue Gray shows he's roughly as good at politics as Sunak and Truss. This government already has the air of a bunch of exhausted, clueless hacks that usually takes years to acquire. Number 10 has no political story for the reptiles, always a recipe for disaster because the reptiles turn on the zookeepers in absence of tasty snacks as soon as the polls turn. Therefore, the narrative, Starmer won so good at politics, is allowed to turn. Voters didn't vote for bullshit Treasury spreadsheets to carry on vandalizing the country. Even a lot of Labour MPs will realise this strategy, combined with letting out repeat rapists to reoffend, etc., is a disaster. So is Cummings right that it's kind of already sort of falling apart for Starmer?
I agree with his characterization of it as not just falling apart, but a lot of it looking like the kind of tired shoddiness that comes towards the end of a long administration. You know, quite a lot of his acts like that sort of stuff, like banning smoking in beer gardens and things like that, which just sounds like, well, it was almost exactly like the stuff Sunak was coming out with towards the end, wasn't it? You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I don't think he's stupid, Starmer. That kind of assumption of a kind of moral, what do they call it? Like exceptionalism? Is it like he's somehow exempted from this? And the way that they put David Lammy on TV to try and explain this as well.
Yeah.
Lammy couldn't explain his way out of a crisp bag, and it's really torturous watching him trying to sort of go, well, it's, you know, we can have a conversation about that, but this is just, no, this is incredibly bad optics. Own it at the very least and say, you know, do you know what? We're just sort of getting used to power after 14 years. And some of us have never had a sniff of it, and we've got to tighten up our, you know, we've got to be whiter than white.
And she does look quite pretty, he could have said. And look, she looks pretty good.
Yes,
these are good dresses. Come on, Starmer's done pretty well, there, lads. He's punching. That's what he could have said.
He is punching. I mean, I'll give him that, definitely. Yeah.
Well, do you think this Starmer, the way you're saying it's sort of tired out already, and Cummings is saying that, do you think it's just that you can sort of enjoy it for a second and say, oh, good, Starmer's coming apart already. Then you realise, is it just part of our collapsing nation that, you know, you get 18 billion Tory leaders in 6 months, and then you get the Labour one comes in, and then he just falls apart immediately. We just can't actually sustain it because our system's just so broken and our country's sort of falling apart.
I don't know. I don't think there's anything that they've done particularly that should have been, you know, unavoidable due to, you know, we have got systemic problems, obviously, and you know, some huge new bills have arrived in the last 5 years. The bill, you know, the debt bill that we have now, largely after COVID, but other things as well, the infrastructure problems that we have. There are major problems, but none of these are what are causing these mishandlings by Starmer. I wouldn't give him that get out. I think at this point, he has got to absolutely tighten up, toughen up, and accept that he has set a standard in his rhetoric for a degree of moral rectitude that he's woefully short of at the moment.
Yeah. No, I just kind of meant that I enjoy Starmer's collapse, but then I suddenly step back and realize, oh, maybe our whole system is just collapsing, thus no prime minister can last. You know, imagine they just all can't last for more than a few months and there's just a series of coups or something. That wouldn't be a great system. But funnily
enough, the one that would have probably lasted of the last 20 years would have been Corbyn. I think he would have been fine on this kind of front.
Yeah, it would have been, all his I's dotted. It had just been, we know he doesn't buy clothes, he just goes to the tomb of Karl Marx constantly. And speaking of that, Diane Abbott, we covered last week, talked about her dates with Corbyn visiting the tomb of Karl Marx and thinking that was a good date. She popped up again, Abbott, condemning Starmer for one of the few good things he's done, which is meeting Georgia Maloney and not completely spazzing it up. But she called him out for meeting a literal fascist. So I just think it's hilarious, given that she went on BBC saying Mao did more good than harm. It's the old thing: you're allowed to be a communist, but you can't be a fascist. We know this, but it's just quite funny. All of Labour are freaking out, going, "Have we learned nothing from the Tories' failures?" It's like, well, yeah, he's learned that he's got to get tough on immigration. He's at least trying to talk about, stopping the boats, and he's prepared to meet Meloni. But it's not a big deal. He's prepared to meet Meloni. She's the centre-right leader of a major European country.
Yeah. I remember being quite excited that there might be an actual fascist in Europe, just from this sort of like popcorn point of view. But she clearly hasn't been, has she?
No, that's your problem.
She has historic associations. Yeah, that's right.
I was just promised a fascist here. This chick's just a blooming populist.
A view of Meloni from the right.
She's very charming, though. I thought she had this special relationship with Sunak. Then you see her giggling, as the Mail puts it, giggling with Kier Starman, and you go like, oh, she just does this with all world leaders. You'd be gutted. It's like when Priti Patel winked at me, but she also winked at our producer. You'd be like, she's just winks at every bloke. So it means nothing. Anyway,
how many of them lean into it, though? That's what you got to ask.
Yeah. Well, that's.
I thought it looked like a tiny bit of genuine rapport between Starmer and Meloni in that clip, and I hope so. I mean, obviously, it's for the better for the country if there is.
It did look
especially
like
with Germany about to lurch to the right as well.
But is she just the queen of rapport? That's what I'm starting to wonder. What about? Okay, those are our main stories, and we've done a decent chunk there. I thought I'd quickly go through some fun stories that are, well, some of them actually aren't fun, but they're kind of silly or woke. Now, on the Weekly Skeptic, we used to do Peak Woke. Now, I invented all the sections on that show. It's set for Peak Woke, which is more, may have been Toby. So I can't really take. So it's like, can I take Peak Woke? So I might call this Weak Poke, which I did invent.
Weak Poke,
yeah,
nice.
Weak Poke, yeah. So that's, I might just call it that. But anyway, one of the ridiculous stories from this week was this Lib Dem councillor. I was diagnosed with PTSD over Brexit. And this was amazing. And you knew it was the Independent reporting this because it said she was speaking movingly. And I was like, is it moving? Of the profound impact Brexit had on her life. So get this. She says, I'm European before I'm English. Of course, she's called Antonia Harrison, some posh show. And there's my prejudice coming out. But she went to a therapist and she was told she had PTSD. Basically, she lay down on the therapist's couch. It was like, tell me about Brexit. And she even said to her daughter, the day after the election, I told my daughter, this is the worst day of your life. Imagine telling your own daughter, this is the worst day of your life. She might be like, actually, Mum, it was when I realized you were my mum. But it's like, this is the worst day of your life. And then for the most kind of Remainery kind of elite metropolitan thing we could possibly have, she said she has a master's in international law. She should be in Brussels like I was at her age. Instead, she's stuck here. Did you hear about this story? This is unbelievable. It's beyond parody. She has a property in Marbella as well, and she's gutted because she wanted to retire there.
That is mad. I mean, that is just crazy. And it is interesting how it's still resonating. There were, people destroyed, people lost their minds over Brexit. Obviously, a number of very high-profile political figures, philosophers, novelists, can really soil the bed horribly in the years after Brexit and continue to do so. Some of them utterly lost their reputation. But I haven't heard of anyone saying they had PTSD from it before, and they're getting taken. This is the trouble, though. We have an enormously inflated, therapy culture, and that includes an enormous number of people who are qualified only to do that kind of thing and are likely to indulge it. They will indulge it with all of the seriousness that they would do a serious PTSD if somebody had come back from a couple of tours of Nam, and because that's where they you just follow the money. It's a terrible, terrible thing. I had I've talked about this on it. It's a bit of a sort of bête noire, hobby horse, whatever of mine. But do you remember Carl Sagan?
Yeah,
the sort of science, physics popularizer, astronomist, cosmologist. He wrote a book. It was pretty much the Bible for the new atheist movement before Dawkins and Hitchens came across, and elevated it with their Four Horsemen stuff. It was called Demon Haunted World, and it was about how we still had corners of superstition in America in particular, that it was almost, he regarded America as a little bit like, in the same way that when Christianity spread across Europe, it didn't extinguish paganism. Rather, the church made an accommodation with paganism, and you had the pagan god of the gaps in the same way. Now you have the Christian god of the gaps that science hasn't filled in yet, And he said in America, there is still this kind of, we have a scientific revolution, we have enlightenment, but still there are pockets of only this far away from burning witches if they were given a chance, And it was a great book, and he makes really, really good observations about it. But one of the things that he attacks with the most full throttle raw is therapy culture, and in particular affirmation culture, where he said he gives a long example of somebody who manages to persuade his therapist that he really is traveling to other planets at night, astral traveling, and he has seen other alien civilizations, and then comes back and explains and describes what he's encountered, both culturally and geographically and physically and everything. And at first, the therapist, thinks it's probably a good idea to indulge this and pretend I think it's true, because that will help him trust me, and then gradually we can come down together. But over the course of weeks and then turns into months, at no doubt, eye-watering sums, even in 1984 or whatever it was, the therapist comes to believe it himself, until at the end, the bloke who is suffering these delusions has to say to him, listen, mate, it's nonsense. I've been making it up, And it's like this horrible kind of cognitive dissonance almost overwhelms and sends the therapist insane. And this was absolutely part of the kind of rational community, the science-based community, the new atheist movement, the Enlightenment gang, the Steven Pinkers or whatever. And yet they are the ones now who fall for that crap. They are the very same ones who think that you should provide gender-affirming care when somebody thinks they've been born into the wrong body. They are the ones who think that that therapy is the right response to any issue you're going through, instead of getting out in the back garden and digging a hole, or going for a steep walk up a hill, or, having even possibly, Fight Club is probably a better response to a lot of male neuroses than lying on a couch and just navel gazing.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
So, it's a funny story, but it's the funny tip of a more troubling iceberg. I mean, we've talked about this on GB News, how many people now graduate from university and go straight onto sickness benefit because their mental health means they don't believe themselves capable of entering the workforce. It's a really fucking serious problem. It sounds funny, it's easily satirized, but it's a huge part of the drain on our productivity is people are just believing themselves to be ever more fragile. It's terrible. It's Haidt and Lukianoff, Coddling of the American Mind. It's a terrible disservice we do to them.
Well, I think of Thomas Saz, how he pronounced it, who coined the therapeutic state, didn't he? He had this book about if you just Google it, the collaboration between psychiatry and government leads to what Saz calls the therapeutic state, a system in which disapproved actions, thoughts, and emotions are repressed, cured through pseudo-medical interventions. And that's where we are. Everything's a medical thing, and it eventually becomes. You can sort of see it with even colleagues like ours. When Andrew Lawrence sort of had expressed a political opinion, he had mental health. He was mentally ill, according to Stuart Lee.
Yeah.
And you see these, and COVID was kind of the apotheosis of it. I mean, that then it even expanded to physical health. If you didn't take the vaccine, there was something wrong with you. You were because you didn't want to take the vaccine. It was not a medical act; it was a political act. And the therapeutic state means ostensibly
everything is pathologized, essentially,
and everything's politicized.
Christopher Lasch is very good on it as well. Christopher Lasch, Lasch. If anyone who's watching hasn't read his books, very worthwhile.
I need to go on to him as well. I keep hearing about Lasch. So exactly. And I myself have even gone to therapy. It's not really done anything. And these days I go, I was sucked into the therapeutic state. And actually, of course, you're going to feel pretty weird in this culture, because it's a weird culture as a man when you should be out killing and hunting and.
Of course you should.
You're going to feel a bit weird in this culture and a bit anxious at times.
Well, you can certainly we used to sublimate, hunting instincts. Virtually every physical sport that you can play is based on some sort of hunting or military system, isn't it? Or code, from track and field up to, team sports. But those then get pathologized as well, even the things that you're doing to sublimate the natural thing. And eventually it's all squeezed out of you. And as somebody said on Twitter today, I think it was the what's it called, the critical drinker guy, was like attacking a woman who'd been saying that men, were their own worst enemies because they won't get together and they should provide each other with safe spaces where they can, share their. And he was like, we have had safe spaces for hundreds of years. They were called football clubs and rugby clubs and just working men's drinking clubs and bars and even strip clubs, There were lots of all-male spaces where men felt able to say, God, I tell you what, sometimes I don't know if I can cope. There were places where you could sit down over a couple of beers with your mate and offload. But as soon as women demand entry into those places, they are not the same anymore, and they have convinced that men were in there running the country and had secret agenda that they were being excluded from, whereas in reality that was part of men's self-care system.
Yeah, exactly.
And sadly it's just being pathologized as well.
I saw that tweet and the reply to it. Yeah, and the initial tweeter was just committing that classic fallacy of believing that men's mental health, so-called, must be dealt with in the same way as women's, that it's by getting together and chatting about stuff, which famously isn't, though it is getting together in
Well,
spaces.
I mean, talking things through, but in a different tone of voice, and using a bit of comedy and a little bit of banter and teasing or whatever, or at least in a different space. But yeah.
Yeah, in a different way.
Yeah, but you do. I mean, the research, follow the science. The research is absolutely unambiguous on this. The single best thing you can do for your mental health, male or female, young or old, gay or straight, whatever, is physical exercise. Hard physical exercise, repeated, regular, hard physical. Get out of breath, make your lungs burn, make your muscles ache. It is proven to be better for you than any amount of talking cure, any amount of SSRIs. There's a place for some of these other things, no doubt, but that should be absolutely your first recourse. And again, almost absurdly difficult to find any opportunity to do that kind of stuff now.
Yeah, well, I try and do strength training 3 times a week. My trainer, here's a Lib Dem sentence for you. My trainer's been on holiday, so I've not been able to do it. So it's fallen apart, and my mental health's fallen apart because I've got PTSD. Because my personal trainer's on holiday.
Do you ever do a fight at all? Do you ever had a fight, like actually learning jiu-jitsu or one of those?
I've had one street fight and I've learned a bit of boxing, but I think I'm not sure about the guy teaching me. The gloves didn't have very good padding, or I'm just not suited for it, and I've injured my wrist quite badly, quite quickly.
I tried boxing and a couple of similar things, and even just had a bag. But I find the jarring of it actually does leave me in pain. My neck really felt. But I do think that if you're younger and capable of taking that on, fighting is probably the thing that men should do most.
Yeah.
I've got a son who's 17 now, and
we're both
getting through his A levels. But I really want him to. I want him to fight.
Yeah, you definitely should fight. And I've tried with boxing. I'm going to go back again, but it's just. I just think these. It was either the technique or the gloves. My wrist it got injured too badly. But yeah, men should all fight.
You can wrap it up a lot. You know that, right? You're supposed to wrap them up with a bandage. Yeah,
well, now I'm just going to get a load of weapons and get on the golf course.
Yeah,
just kidding.
Study the blade.
Well, that's probably enough time because you've done an hour. I don't want to keep you much longer. I've got loads of other silly stories, but not silly. Some of them are quite.
Do one more if you want.
All right, we'll do one more. We'll go with Asian man used fake name on Telegram to stir up racial hatred during riots. So this was a guy called Ihsan Hussain, and he posted online things about P bashing using the name Chris Nolan. Poor old Christopher Nolan. Well, no, he'd seen one Batman film, and he said things like, "Sick of these smelly scumbags. We've got a blues match on Saturday. We can do part 2 on Saturday. Get these P scums out." Anyway, he was basically the Jussie Smollett of the UK riots. He was saying, pretending to be a white working class bloke, trying to beat up Asian blokes, but he was in fact an Asian man. I mean, any comments?
I don't know anything about this particular case, but I will say I think 90% of online hate crimes are exactly of this kind. A huge amount of it is hoax. Wilfred O'Reilly, has written a brilliant book a few years ago about hate hoaxes in America. He's really worth following and reading all his stuff. Wilfred Riley, really smart guy, mixed race himself, and so has a sort of pass, to be extraordinarily cynical and scathing about race baiting hoaxes in particular, but also of Jews defiling synagogues and people going online and adopting identities that are exactly the opposite of what they, and of course we also know this. There is some truth to this, that a lot of it comes from Russia or enemies of this state who want to just create discord, and the sense we have that our own societies are falling apart. Most people in this country are extraordinarily sympathetic and tolerant and so on. That is, of course, the problem to some extent, that we will all be taken to our breaking point sooner or later, and ours just happens to be that much closer to being actually broken before we all register it. As you could argue that, but the vast majority of people just want there to be some communication. I think 90% of the time, what people are worried about when they see mass immigration, for instance, is that it disincentivizes the new arrivals from having to make friends with the people already here. It's that sense of alienation. It's not like it couldn't possibly work, but it is that sense that there's no opportunity or mechanism for them to be encouraged to learn, to try again. Funnily enough, team sports were often a way to do that. If you had a local football side, they were always looking for healthy young men to join, and they might come in. But if you start to get segregated football sides, then you've got a more serious problem. So I'm not at all surprised to find that, I wouldn't be at all surprised to find that half of the people stirring up trouble. It was like, again, Andrew Lawrence, you mentioned, when he was banned off Twitter for making a couple of disobliging remarks about Marcus Rashford and penalty taking, in the Euros. The vast majority of the supposed sort of hate tweets and racist tweets and so on that came out during that football match originated outside of the United Kingdom. They literally come out of Twitter farms that are just created to sow discord, And some people just want to do that, and it's extraordinary. But almost nobody is who you think they're going to be, are they? I mean, we've all seen Bronze Age pervert now for who he is.
Yeah.
And God knows how many of them, and a lot of them are people, they're very intelligent, educated people. I still think Bronze Age pervert is a very interesting commentator. He's had a lot of interesting things to say. It slightly changes my opinion of my frame for reading his stuff now I've seen him, but
well, Morag Nationalist is pretty jacked, so he's backed it up to some extent. I haven't seen. Yes, I can't remember what Bronze Age pervert looks like, but he's yes. Well, this is like you say.
He's like me.
Oh, right, okay. It often comes from, so it backs up everything he said. It often comes from other countries. What annoyed me about this was, as well, the judge committed it to the Crown Court, but he said, "I will decline jurisdiction in relation to these matters. My powers of sentencing are clearly and substantially exceeded. You've pleaded guilty, and you will get credit for your guilty plea in due course." And that annoyed me, because I'm like, did any of these rioters get credit for their guilty plea? But is this guy pretending to be one going to get
very
credit?
Good question. Yeah, it's a good question, because they were all encouraged to plead guilty, and they all got the book thrown at them anyway, didn't they?
Yeah, that was a
dark day.
That was a court like Bane's court in Dark Knight Rises. Courts will be summoned or whatever. It's like pure. You will plead guilty.
You can do all those voices.
Exile
you do
or
his
death.
Voices. It's Peterson's voice slightly, isn't it? Even a little more constrained.
A lower Peterson. When Peterson cracks, he becomes, clean your bloody rooms, or Gotham will be destroyed. Gotham will endure. Yeah, it's good to have it's fun to do that. I've been saying they're eating the dogs just on GB News every night, just because it's my only joy. It's the only thing I enjoy
it's
doing.
Great. It's a really good impression.
We're talking about.
It's funny how little those things touch him, though, isn't it? Remember, what's his name? Serafinovich had a brilliant Donald Trump impression. Do you remember in 2016? He did him as a very camp gay man, and he would do lip sync over and it was just so funny. You thought Trump can't survive this, but of course none of it matters.
He just grew stronger. He grew stronger.
Yes, yeah.
I'll throw it in. We'll be talking about hospital parking in England. I'll be like, they're eating the dogs. Like, Nick, how was that? How was that?
Sorry.
All right.
Where were we?
Thanks so much, Simon. Where can people find you, as if they somehow don't already know you?
Yeah, well, I have got a few tour dates coming up. My website is called The Simon Evans. You can find them there. There's one in Arlington, and one in Deal, and one in Croydon, and one in Chipping Camden. Those are the next few, I think, end of September, early October. But yeah, The Simon Evans is my website. There's all my tour dates on there. And of course, The Simon Evans is my Twitter account as well.
All right.
And always appreciate a follow. Thank you.
Yes, definitely follow Simon. And actually, I'm annoyed I didn't say this at the start, but go to nickdixon.net, because I have a new episode out with Professor Ed Dutton, highly entertaining, and it's only available on nickdixon.net. We go into his new book, Woke Eugenics, so you can imagine how that conversation goes. That's not really safe for YouTube, so go to nickdixon.net, £5, and you get my conversation with Ed, as well as all my other guest interviews, which I'm sticking only on nickdixon.net from now on. But we are doing this, the current thing, as a free show, because I'm a great guy. So go to nickdixon.net for all the extra stuff, and we'll see you again next week. And thanks, Simon, once again.